In The Power of Discipline, author Daniel Walter explores how we can increase discipline in our lives to achieve our goals with greater ease. Our natural tendency is to choose immediate pleasure and comfort, while the path of discipline and hard work feels more challenging. However, Daniel believes that by developing the right habits and mindset, we can build discipline in our lives. In this book, Daniel explains how we can create productive habits, the barriers to discipline in our body and mind, and the challenges we must face. Ravi, a young man from a small town, always had big dreams. He wanted to accomplish something great in his life, but there was one thing holding him back: discipline. He struggled to stay disciplined, despite his best efforts. Every morning, Ravi started his day full of energy. He created a timetable for himself, promised to wake up on time, and made a list of tasks to complete throughout the day. But by the end of the day, he found himself slipping back into old habits. His promise to wake up early was broken, the list of tasks remained incomplete, and once again, he fell into his lazy routine. He couldn't understand why he kept failing at sticking to his plans. One day, Ravi met an elderly man sitting under a large, old peepal tree outside the village. The man's face radiated peace, and his eyes reflected a deep understanding of life. Ravi stopped and looked at him. The elderly man smiled and asked, "You seem troubled, son. What's the matter?" Ravi slowly began to explain his frustration. "I want to do something big in life, but I can't seem to stick to discipline. I try every time, but after a few days, I give up. I don't know why I keep failing." The elderly man listened carefully to Ravi and then spoke gently. "Son, have you heard of the power of discipline?" Ravi shook his head. "No, what's that?" The elderly man picked up a book from beside him and said, "This book teaches something very important. The first lesson is craving consistency. Your biggest problem is that you fear change. Your mind wants you to keep doing what you have always done. That's why you keep failing." Ravi was surprised. "But how can I overcome this fear?" he asked. The elderly man replied, "Your mind fears change. It wants you to stay in your comfort zone because change makes it anxious. Whenever you try something new, your mind will try to stop you. But remember, change is the key to getting where you want to go." Ravi listened intently, beginning to realize that his biggest problem was his fear of change. He was stuck in his old habits, and that fear was preventing him from moving forward. The elderly man continued, "You need to take small steps every day. At first, change will feel difficult, but the more you try, the easier it will get. Your mind will start to accept it." Ravi nodded slowly, feeling as though he had found the solution to his problem. He knew now that he had to start embracing change, even if it felt uncomfortable at first. The elderly man concluded, "Remember, change is what will lead you to success. One day, you'll look back and be proud that you overcame your fears." Ravi's face lit up with a new sense of hope. He had finally understood that his fear of change was what was holding him back. He was ready to take those small steps and embrace discipline, no matter how uncomfortable the process seemed. Ravi's eyes shone with newfound determination. He had made up his mind to make small changes every day and face his fears head-on. He now understood that his biggest challenge was his own mind, and he had to conquer it. This was a turning point in Ravi's life, but it was just the beginning. He still had a lot to learn, and this was the first step in the long journey that would eventually lead him to true success. Every day, Ravi tried to make small changes. He had taken the elderly man's advice to heart and started focusing on craving consistency. But, as simple as it may sound, change wasn't easy. For a few days, Ravi did well, but soon, the same problem resurfaced. He started feeling like he had already changed, and that's when he made his mistake. One day, Ravi found himself sitting under the same peepal tree again. The elderly man appeared once more, and his gaze fixed on Ravi's face, as if he understood everything. Ravi, feeling a bit embarrassed, said, "I thought I had started making changes in my life. But after a few days, my old habits came back." The elderly man smiled gently and replied, "That's completely natural, son. The journey of change is long, and there's something very important that you need to understand. It's time to teach you the second lesson of the power of discipline." Ravi, now curious, asked, "What's the second lesson?" The elderly man explained, "The second lesson is about overestimating personal abilities, thinking we are capable of more than we actually are. When we believe we can do a lot, but in reality, we cannot, that's when we face failure." Ravi listened intently, but still had questions. "What does this have to do with my problem?" he asked. The elderly man continued, "See, when you made some changes, you felt like you had achieved a lot. You thought you didn't need to work harder anymore, and that's where you made the mistake. This is what we call denial. When we think we're capable of everything, we often ignore our weaknesses." Ravi was confused. "So, how can I fix this?" The elderly man replied, "To fix this, you first need to accurately assess your true capabilities. You need to be honest with yourself, and there's a very useful technique for that: feedback. Until you take advice from an experienced person, you won't be able to recognize your true potential." Ravi nodded slowly, reflecting on what the elderly man had said. "I always feel like I can do something, but then I end up failing." The elderly man nodded and said, "That's your real problem. You place too much trust in yourself but don't put in the required effort. When you think you've accomplished something, that's actually the point when your real work begins. This is when you shouldn't stop, but push yourself even harder." Ravi took a deep breath, thinking about what he had just heard. "I often feel like I keep postponing tasks, and in the end, I never complete them." The elderly man responded seriously, "Procrastination is your biggest enemy. It comes in two forms. First, you get distracted by easy, instant gratification tasks instead of focusing on harder work. Second, you spend so much time planning that you don't have enough time left to actually do the work." Ravi was surprised. "Yes, I always waste too much time planning," he admitted. The elderly man nodded knowingly. "Planning is not bad, but until you're 70% sure about what needs to be done, you shouldn't spend too much time planning. The real progress starts when you take action. Keep planning until it becomes a problem," the elderly man said. "After that point, you need to start taking action. Remember, the sooner you begin working, the sooner your procrastination will disappear." Ravi realized how much his habit of procrastination had held him back. He would often put off difficult tasks, and sometimes, he wouldn't even get around to completing them. He made a promise to himself that from now on, he would try to overcome procrastination. The elderly man gave him one last piece of advice: "You need to truly understand your abilities, and for that, you must honestly assess yourself. Also, never delay starting your work. Whenever you feel like you're just thinking and not acting, that's the moment you need to begin." Ravi listened carefully. He now understood that change wasn't just about starting, but also about continuous hard work and accurately assessing his own abilities. He made up his mind that he would not only make changes but also correctly recognize his true potential and never shy away from hard work. But this was only the second step of his journey. There was still much more to learn. The elderly man's words were making his path easier. Ravi began applying the lessons the elderly man had taught him in his life. He was trying to better himself and move towards his goals. But one day, he felt that no matter how hard he worked, it still didn't seem enough. His expectations were huge, but the results didn't seem as promising. Feeling disheartened, He went back to sit under the same peepal tree where he had met the elderly man. A little while later, the elderly man appeared once again. Ravi tried to hide his troubles, but the elderly man could see the sadness in his eyes. He gently spoke. "You seem troubled again, son. What's going on?" Ravi sighed deeply and said, "I followed your advice, tried making changes, but now I feel like maybe it's just not possible for me. The more I think I'll manage, the less I actually achieve. My dreams are big, but the time it's taking to reach them is making me lose hope." The elderly man smiled warmly and replied, "That's your next lesson. There's nothing wrong with your dreams, but the problem lies in your expectations. Unrealistic expectations." Ravi looked at him, confused. Unrealistic expectations? What does that mean? The elderly man explained, "Often, we fail to understand the time and effort needed to achieve our goals. We think everything will happen quickly, and when it doesn't, we lose heart. This is when we set expectations that don't match reality. And when we don't get the results we expect, we start considering ourselves failures." Ravi nodded slowly. "I think I've done that. I thought that just a few days of hard work would change everything." The elderly man nodded in agreement. "Exactly. And when you didn't see immediate results, you lost hope and gave up. That's the trap of unrealistic expectations." Ravi thought for a moment, his eyes filled with realization. "So, what should I do now?" The elderly man smiled and said, "In any task, time and effort are required. If you set a big goal, you need patience and dedication to achieve it." Ravi, feeling a bit defeated, asked, "So, should I just give up on my dreams?" The elderly man looked at him with affection and replied, "No, son, never give up on your dreams. But yes, learn to set realistic expectations. Don't expect everything to happen instantly. Instead, evaluate your effort honestly, understand how much time and energy it will take, and keep working toward it." Ravi listened carefully, feeling as though the elderly man's words had truly opened his eyes. He understood that his journey was not about quick results, but about consistent, focused effort. The misunderstanding was slowly clearing up. The elderly man continued, "Let's say you want to learn knitting. If you think you'll master it in just a week, that would be an illusion. Knitting is an art, and it takes time to learn. In the beginning, it may be difficult, but with regular practice, you will gradually become skilled. The problem is that you underestimate the time and effort your goal will require." Ravi lowered his head and said, "I understand now. I expected results too quickly. I thought I'd succeed instantly, and when that didn't happen, I became discouraged." The elderly man nodded. "Exactly. And when you give up too soon, you distance yourself from success. Unrealistic expectations make you lose heart. But if you are patient and give your goal the right amount of time, nothing can stop you from succeeding." Ravi took a deep breath and asked, "So, what should I do?" The elderly man explained, "First, you need to assess your goal realistically. Understand how much time and effort it will take to achieve it. And most importantly, you need to move forward little by little every day. Make your expectations more realistic. The sooner you understand this, the easier your journey will become." Ravi took the elderly man's words seriously. He now understood that his dreams were big, but he hadn't understood the amount of effort and patience required to achieve them. The elderly man concluded, "Dreams should be big, but the path to achieving them should also be big. If you want to move toward success, you need to direct your patience and effort in the right direction. And the most important thing is to stop being negative about yourself. Have faith in yourself and draw strength from your small wins." Ravi made a firm decision. This time, he would set realistic expectations. He understood that every big dream requires time, effort, and patience. He no longer worried about immediate results. He now knew that to fulfill his dreams, he had to stay on the right path and keep moving forward. A new turning point came in Ravi's life when he started listening to the elderly man's advice and applying it. He felt a new energy, a new understanding, and true discipline growing inside him. But he also knew that he still had much to learn. So, when he met the elderly man under the peepal tree again, he was ready for the next lesson. The elderly man smiled and said, "Son, you've learned a lot so far. You've learned to avoid unrealistic expectations, and you've started believing in yourself and your efforts. Now, the next lesson you need to learn is to become comfortable with discomfort." Ravi looked at him, a bit puzzled, and asked, "Become comfortable with discomfort? What does that mean?" The elderly man took a deep breath and said, "You see, discipline only comes when we get used to doing things we don't want to do. If you always stick to things that bring you comfort and joy, how will you learn discipline? True discipline means stepping out of your comfort zone and doing those things that may feel uncomfortable but are necessary for your progress." Ravi nodded, starting to understand, but he asked, "But how do I embrace discomfort?" The elderly man smiled and said, "That's exactly what I'm here to teach you. It's natural to fear discomfort. Our minds always push us toward ease. But to grow, we need to learn to take on those tasks that are difficult or uncomfortable, but will push us forward. Our mind always seeks comfort, but if you want to see the real path to your goals, you need to step out of your comfort zone," said the elderly man. Ravi asked, "So, where should I begin?" The elderly man pointed to a dog sitting comfortably under a tree and said, "Look at that dog. It's sitting there comfortably, not worried about food or sleep. It just wants to rest. But if a person stays like that, will they ever move forward?" Ravi thought for a moment and then replied, "No, probably not." The elderly man nodded and continued, "Exactly. You need to develop the habit of doing things that feel uncomfortable. For example, if you like going to parties but find work difficult, you have to control your desires. The benefit you'll get from working will far exceed the joy of the party. This is the art of becoming comfortable with discomfort." Ravi listened carefully and thought about how, many times, he felt uncomfortable with small things. He was afraid to go on stage, nervous about meeting new people, and would back away whenever faced with difficulties. The elderly man, sensing his thoughts, said, "If you're afraid to go on stage, start with small steps. For example, try singing in front of your friends. That way, you'll learn how to face discomfort, and gradually, your fear will decrease." Ravi realized that while he couldn't immediately give a speech on a big stage, taking small steps to overcome his fear was possible. The elderly man added, "To deal with discomfort, the most important thing is to see it as a series of small challenges. If you try to face a big discomfort all at once, you may lose courage. So always start with small steps, so that gradually, you'll become comfortable even in discomfort." Ravi then asked, "But what if I fail repeatedly? Won't that fear always remain?" The elderly man replied seriously, "The fear of failure exists in everyone. But it's this fear that keeps you stuck in discomfort. If you retreat every time you fear failure, you'll never build discipline. Understand this. Discomfort is temporary. But if you have the courage to endure it, your confidence and capabilities will grow." Ravi now understood that he had to overcome his fear of failure and embrace new experiences. He said to the elderly man, "I understand now. I need to step out of my comfort zone and take small steps." The elderly man smiled and said, "Exactly. And remember, true growth is hidden in discomfort. Only when you embrace your fears and discomfort will you reach new heights." Ravi made a firm decision in his heart. From now on, He would take one new uncomfortable step every day, no matter how small. He realized that discipline wasn't just about doing work, but about doing the tasks that seemed difficult, the ones he had been avoiding. As the elderly man left, he gave one last piece of advice. Remember, success comes to those who find comfort in discomfort. Make discomfort your friend, and watch the changes it brings. Ravi smiled and nodded, silently vowing that he would no longer run from discomfort, but face it head-on. He now knew that this was the path that would lead him to his dreams. Ravi absorbed every word of the elderly man deeply. He realized that in the journey to success, he would not only have to battle discomfort but also confront himself. To walk the path of discipline, Ravi decided to completely change himself. Each day, he would push himself to face discomfort, no matter how small the challenge. Ravi started putting himself in challenging situations. He began with small things, like waking up early to run, choosing studies over friends' parties, and meeting new people to face his fears. Gradually, he realized he was becoming more confident and mentally stronger. One day, when he met the elderly man under the same peepal tree, there was a noticeable shine of confidence in Ravi's eyes. The elderly man immediately recognized the change in him. Ravi had become a new person, someone who had embraced discomfort and broken through his limitations. The elderly man smiled and said, "You no longer need me, my son. You have found yourself, and now your journey will teach you." Ravi touched the elderly man's feet in gratitude and said, "Your teachings have changed me. Now I understand the true meaning of discipline and how to achieve it." The elderly man responded, "Remember, son, challenges and discomfort will always be a part of life. But as long as you have discipline, you can face any difficulty." Ravi nodded, filled with new energy, and began walking towards his future. He now knew that discomfort was the key to real success. He had not only learned discipline but also gained confidence and mental strength. The boy who once struggled with himself was now moving quickly toward his dreams. His story had not ended, it had just begun. A story where he would overcome every discomfort and achieve his goals. So friends, that was today's book summary. How did you like it? Please let us know in the comments. And thank you for listening to the summary till the end.